All right, let's hear now from state petroleum company PetroSA issuing an invite to the media to cover the briefing on the regurgitation of allegations on PetroSA operations. So saying that false information is being regurgitated by the media. These are historical mishaps that implicated the operations of PetroSA. This may relate to claims that Gazprom Bank will be partnering with PetroSA gas to liquids refinery in Mossel Bay. That's a Russian company under sanctions. Let's listen in.
As a company, we are now besieged with an army which is recklessly resolved. It is unfortunate that the relentless leaking of company information to the media persists, both within our ranks and outside, by disgruntled parties stemming from a myriad of factors, including non-performance, malfeasance, or corruption. First and foremost, we wish to address some of these allegations that have surfaced in the media environment as if they were new. We'll start with the reinstatement of the Mossel Bay gas to liquids refinery. In the midst of the misleading narrative in the media environment in relation to the reinstatement of the GTL refinery, it is necessary to provide context as to why the refinery reinstatement is critical to implement for the economic development of the country. Can we mute all those online? PetroSA's economic acidity is critical in anchoring the Southern Cape economy. Therefore, it is imperative that it is done timely. No legal advice? You can continue. Okay. PetroSA's economic acidity is critical in anchoring the Southern Cape economy. Therefore, it is imperative that it is done timely. This impacts approximately 1,400 direct jobs and supports around 29,000 sustainable jobs and contributes about 0.6% to the gross domestic product. Diminishing refinery capacity in South Africa continues to be a challenge. No new fuel refining has been built in South Africa for almost 30 years. In that period, the internal combustion engine evolved to reduce emissions, and demand for low sulfur fuels has grown. Demand is increasingly being met by imports. In 2022, South Africa's refineries accounted for less than 35% of finished product consumed locally, against about 80% in 2010. Yet, the events of the last few years, including COVID-19, supply shocks, and the impacts of the Russia-Ukraine war, have underscored the importance of South Africa and the SADC region growing local fuel refining capacity, not shrinking it, to ensure security of supply. The unavailability of oil and gas feedstock has a far-reaching impact on linked downstream sectors, which rely on refinery byproducts. Outputs from the petrochemical sector, including chemicals such as synthetic rubbers and fabrics, industrial chemicals and plastics, all of which are important inputs into various manufacturing processes, have been impacted by this reduced capacity in the refining space. I must also mention that from a PetroSA stakeholder perspective, the reinstatement of the refinery is a critical talking point. And referencing our most recent stakeholder engagement in Mossel Bay over the last 2 weeks, we did have to interact around how the immediate communities would also be impacted by the planned reinstatement work. I must also refer to that over the years, we've seen that the continued maintenance cycles have also had quite a significant impact in the region. And so it is important that we continue to interrogate how the ecosystem is impacted by the shift in the refining capacity of the country. And of course, the root cause of this decline is important to probe. The South African refining nameplate is about 72,000 barrels per day, of which crude refining accounts for 60% of the production. All the crude refineries were built in the 1960s, the fuel specifications developed to address environmental concerns necessitates that major capital investment is made into this refining capacity. In order to maximize return on investment, South Africa needs to make strategic decisions in terms of where and how the new refinery capacity must be deployed. Most integrated oil companies own local refining capacity. IOCs have over time increased imports of finished product for various reasons, including aging local refining infrastructure, clean fuel regulations, which require massive investments in refineries to produce products that comply with emissions targets, cheap access to imported white product, and the fact that trading margins are higher from imported terminals than refineries. For South Africa to bring refined product imports down to 15% of local supply, domestic refinery capacity must grow to about 1.258,792 barrels per day, approximately 126 million barrels per day. This requires adding another 540,000 barrels per day to the existing capacity. To scale up the refining capacity at Mossel Bay requires that we take some bold steps. Our GTL refinery was put on maintenance and care at the end of 2020 due to feedstock challenges. Following this, a decision was made to reinstate the GTL by sourcing a strategic partner. Submissions were received from various companies locally and globally. The RFP process, triggered in January this year, was evaluated as guided by the PFMA requirements. The process was concluded and handed over to follow all other government processes, including Cabinet, on the appointment of the preferred strategic partner. PetroSA welcomes Cabinet's decision, announced this morning, which regards to support PetroSA working with Gazprom Africa to reinstate PetroSA's liquids refinery capacity, as it enables PetroSA to move forward. The optimum size for the PetroSA liquids refinery capacity has to be complementary to the existing refineries in meeting the demand of the Western Cape, Northern Cape, Eastern Cape, and to ensure that it improves the return on investment. There is a need to strictly regulate petroleum refiners and the importation of refined petroleum products in South Africa. The incentive to protect and grow local refining capacity must be resolved through a pricing structure and policy position that only allows firms that are willing to assume the risk of refining locally and investing in clean fuels too, to import and aggregate white product. This entails changing the structure of the basic fuel price and indexing it to local refining costs. These players will then be able to amortize the required investments in refining infrastructure over time. This approach will encourage IOCs to increase refining capacity to the level of mega refineries and benefit from the associated economies of scale. Adopting these policies will benefit the South African economy and will incentivize increased local refining capacity that can produce for South Africa and the broader SADC market and beyond. To Project Mthombo. South Africa's crude refineries, as indicated earlier, were built in the 1960s, and it was anticipated that with the growing deficit between demand and supply, new refining capacity would be required. New refining capacity would also address environmental concerns, as it was expected to meet the clean fuel specification. To make a multi-rand investment of that nature, it is prudent to conduct feasibility studies, and adequately so. It is a global norm that feasibility studies can cost around 5 to 7% of the total capital investment, which essentially these feasibility studies could comprise your environmental assessments, the associated socio-economic assessments, the technical studies, as well as some of the commercial analysis. And this is in order to de-risk the project. I must reflect that at the time, PetroSA was advancing Project Mthombo, was in partnership with Sinopec. At the time of the go, no-go decision on Mtombo, around 2015, 2016, it was important to note that all South African crude refineries were still online. The feasibility study outcome supported the decision not to proceed at the time. However, the recent closure of crude refineries places South Africa in a vulnerable state when it comes to fuel supply. Hence, it is important for DMRE to revisit the business decision on refining capacity. PetroSA welcomes the cabinet decision regarding the liquids refining at PetroSA. In terms of Ikwezi, Project Ikwezi was a 5-well drilling campaign for the FO field in Block 9. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the Block 9 is owned by PetroSA, and one of the fields within it that we're focusing on is that referred to as FO field. And this is all off the coast of Mossel Bay. And it is estimated that this particular activity was in the tune of about $1.295,000 US. That was expected to produce around 242 billion cubic feet at the time. The project successfully drilled 4 wells, but only 3 wells were completed, and these cumulatively were able to produce about 60 billion cubic feet at a cost of $1.2 billion US. The gas from which these wells enabled PetroSA to continue with production from 2014 until around 2020. And during this period, it produced 65 billion cubic feet of gas, which is higher than the estimation at the project termination.